If you've spent any time camping alone, you already know the feeling. That particular silence that falls over the woods after dark. The way every snapped twig or distant rustle suddenly feels like it means something. Most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, you wake up the next morning, pack your gear, and drive home with nothing to show for it but a good night's sleep and a story about a raccoon. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the thing making that noise is exactly as dangerous as you feared. Tonight, I've got 3 stories from listeners who found that out the hard way. As always, names have been changed or omitted at the request of the people involved. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Johnsons, submitted by a listener in his early 30s. About 7 years ago, my girlfriend at the time, I'll call her Aaron, finally got tired of my nonsense and kicked me out. I won't pretend I didn't deserve it. No job, no direction, happy to coast through life on someone else's dime. In my own twisted logic, I decided the best way to process the breakup was to drive out to the campsite Aaron and I used to visit together and feel sorry for myself in the woods. I convinced myself it was an act of independence. It wasn't. The site wasn't fully remote. More of a mixed-use area with a handful of individual campers spread across a fairly wide stretch of land with sporadic park ranger patrols. Aaron and I had a usual spot, and that's exactly where I planted myself with a cooler full of beer and an enormous chip on my shoulder. On the second morning, I woke up to find a car parked uncomfortably close to my tent. A family was setting up camp right beside me. I'll call them the Johnsons, because that's close enough to what the father kept yelling. The Johnsons do not behave like this. The Johnsons help each other. The Johnsons do not act like brats. He had this high-pitched nasal voice that carried right across the site, and the 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, paid him absolutely no attention. They just sprinted around in circles, hurling insults at each other that were genuinely too crude for me to repeat here. The worse they got, the louder the father got. Meanwhile, the mother dragged out a sun lounger, reclined in it, and proceeded to completely ignore everyone. I sat in my camp chair, nursing a beer and glowering at them. I was in a foul mood and itching for a confrontation, and this family was giving me plenty to be annoyed about. At one point, I watched the father grab his son's arm so hard, I genuinely winced. But the kid just called him something awful and ran off like nothing happened. This family was unlike anything I'd ever seen. As evening came in, things got darker. The father's threats toward the kids escalated into something I wasn't comfortable hearing. The mother kept stealing glances at me. I knew I should have gone to bed, but I didn't. I eventually turned in when the wind picked up. Inside my tent, I could still hear them, yelling, screaming, carrying on. After a while, it quieted down. I needed to use the bathroom, slipped out into the tree line, came back, and was almost asleep when the sounds started up again. But this time it was different. The pitch had changed. The mother and daughter were screaming at each other, and I'm almost certain I heard the mother shout, "What did you do to him?" That sentence made my blood run cold. I lay there frozen, trying to work up the nerve to go outside and check. Then I heard a crack, a slap, more screaming. I called the police. The dispatcher informed me the site was outside local jurisdiction and suggested I contact the park ranger for non-emergency issues. I tried to explain that it sounded very much like an emergency, but something about my delivery, or maybe the slurring, didn't inspire confidence. While I fumbled around trying to get the ranger's number on slow mobile data, the tent next door had gone quiet again. Then I noticed it through the fabric wall of my tent. A glow. Not the campfire. Something brighter. Something orange and spreading. I reached for my tent zipper. Started to pull it open. That's when their 4x4 lit up, engine roaring, and came straight at me. I tore the zipper open and threw myself sideways just in time. The vehicle churned straight through my campsite, shredding everything I'd brought with me under its wheels, and disappeared into the dark. I scrambled to my feet and stood there shaking in the dirt, trying to remember how to breathe. Their tent was on fire. I used bottled water and handfuls of dirt to put it out. And in the smoldering wreckage, I thought I saw something that looked like it might have been a body. I can't say for certain. I didn't look closely enough. I called 911. This time they took me seriously. The police showed up, took my statement, told me they'd keep me informed. I never heard from them again. To this day, I have no idea what happened to the Johnson family or how many of them were in that car when it drove away. Story 2. The Man in the Woods, submitted by a listener from the Adirondacks. I used to do a lot of solo hiking, planned routes through areas I knew well, nothing reckless. On one particular trip, about 2 days into a 3-day trek, I started noticing something odd. Trees with holes drilled into them. At first, I assumed kids with a BB gun, or maybe hunters. But when I looked more closely, the holes were too clean. No splintering, no jagged bark. They'd been drilled deliberately. And as I went further in toward my planned campsite, there were more of them. The holes got fresher the deeper I went, some still leaking sap. The smell was something I can only describe as cut grass left to rot in wet bark, sour and tangy and deeply wrong. Against my better judgment, I touched a bit of the sap and tasted it. It was disgusting. Nobody would be harvesting this for anything good. Then I saw the man. He was enormous, tall, broad, heavily bearded, and he was standing with his back to me, drilling into a tree with a hand drill. When he finished, he leaned forward and sucked the sap directly from the hole. Then he threw his head back and made this long, slow, lip-smacking sound. I crouched behind a tree trunk and watched, trying very hard not to exist. Then I stepped on a stick. The crack was like a gunshot in that silence. He spun around and came at me immediately. Full sprint, drill raised above his head. I ran. He was terrifying but slow, and I was young and fast. I pushed hard until I was sure I'd lost him, rerouted entirely, and didn't stop moving until I reached my car. I have never gone back to that area. I don't intend to. Story 3. The Business Suit. Submitted by a listener in his early 30s. 4 days into a planned 8-day solo hike, a man in a business suit walked into my clearing. Not dirty, not injured, just lost. He had this glazed, distant quality about him, like someone who was mostly present but not quite. He said the last thing he remembered was leaving his office 4 days earlier. He had no explanation for how he'd ended up in the middle of nowhere, no memory of the days in between. I invited him to camp with me that night and guide him out the following day. In hindsight, that was an incredibly stupid decision. But I was young and arrogant, and I wanted to be the hero of the story. We hiked together for 3 days. He was far too capable for someone who claimed to be unprepared. He kept up with me on punishing terrain. He asked me, at length and with odd intensity, what I believed happened to people after they died. On the second day, he became convinced we were being followed. He was panicked, frantic, shouting into the tree line. He told me we had a gun and weren't afraid to use it. I hadn't told him about the gun. By the third night, I'd stopped trusting him entirely. I just didn't know what to do about it. Then the men arrived. They came in the dark with flashlights, 3 or 4 of them, moving fast and purposeful, badges I couldn't quite make out. They grabbed the business suit man, cuffed him without a word from him. He didn't resist, didn't protest, didn't even look surprised, and disappeared back into the trees. One agent told me I was safe, that I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. Then they left. The next morning, I found my gun missing from its hidden compartment in my bag. He'd gone through my things without me knowing. I also found that one of my car tires had been slashed. I still don't know who that man was. I don't know if the people who took him were law enforcement. I don't know what would have happened if they hadn't shown up when they did. What I do know is that I spent 3 nights sleeping next to whatever he was, and I am very, very glad I woke up each morning.